this tutorial we're going to be learning the cluster V stitch, which is a stitch that's perfect for beginners and it works really well for scrappy blankets. So let's jump in. Start by making a slip knot using your preferred method. This is how I like to make my slip knots. Then your starting chain needs to be a multiple of 3 stitches plus an extra 4, so a multiple of 3 plus 4. For the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to be going for 19. So there's my starting chain of 19 and I'm ready for row 1. So to start row 1, we're going to make something called a cluster stitch into the 5th chain from the hook. If you're a beginner, that might sound really complicated. Don't worry, I'm going to take you through it step by step. First, we need to identify the 5th chain from the crochet hook, so we're going to count backwards from the hook. We don't count the loop that's on the hook, we count this one here as our first chain from the hook. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're going in this chain here. So to make a cluster stitch, yarn over, put your hook in the 5th chain from the hook. So I'm going in this chain here, and it doesn't matter here whether you go in 1 loop or 2 loops, it's down to personal preference. I like going under 2 loops like that. Yarn over and pull up a loop. You should now have 3 loops on your hook. Yarn over and pull through 2 loops. The stitch we've made here is called a partial double crochet. That's a double crochet in US terms. They're called trebles if you prefer UK terms. So this partial stitch is how we make our cluster stitch. We're going to be making another partial stitch into the same chain. So to do that, yarn over, put your hook into the chain, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. We've now made 2 partial double crochets into the same chain. To turn those partial stitches into a cluster stitch, yarn over and pull through all 3 loops on your hook. That there is a cluster stitch. For future reference, this is called a 2 double crochet cluster because we did 2 partial double crochets. This is the only cluster stitch in this pattern, so I'm going to make life easier and just call this a cluster stitch. Next, chain 1, and we're going to make another cluster stitch back into the same chain. So right now it looks like I can't possibly fit any more stitches in there, but if I take that cluster we've just made and pull it over a little bit, it reveals a bit more space where I can fit my hook. So yarn over, put your hook into the same chain, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. First partial double crochet made. Yarn over, put your hook into the same chain, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. We've now made 2 partial double crochets. We're going to turn that into a cluster by yarning over and pulling through all 3 loops on the hook. So what we've made there is something called a cluster V stitch because we have 2 clusters that are in that shape to make a V shape. So next we're going to skip 2 chains. So skip, skip, and into this 3rd chain here we're going to make another cluster V stitch. So I'll take you through that again step by step. Yarn over, put your hook in that 3rd chain, yarn over, pull up a loop. You should now have 3 loops on your hook. Yarn over and pull through 2 loops. First partial double crochet made. Yarn over, put your hook into the same chain, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. You should now have 3 loops on your crochet hook. Yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. First cluster stitch made. Next, chain 1 and make another cluster stitch back in the same chain. Yarn over, put your hook into the same chain, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. Yarn over, put your hook into the same chain, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2. You should now have 3 loops on your hook. Yarn over, pull through all 3 loops. So that's our next cluster V stitch made. So we're going to repeat this all the way across our chain. So we skip 2 chains, then a cluster V stitch. Skip 2 chains, then a cluster V stitch. Continue that all the way along until you only have a couple of chains left at the end of your chain, and I'll meet you here. So I'm almost at the end of my chain and I've got 2 chains left unworked after a cluster V stitch. To finish off row 1, we're going to skip 1 stitch and then we're going to make 1 double crochet in that final chain. So no partials, no clusters, just a normal double crochet in the final chain. So if we now have a look at our row 1, we've got cluster V stitches all the way along. At the start of the row, we've got a turning chain of 4 here. That actually counts as 1 chain in the foundation chain, and then these first 3 stitches that we skipped, we're going to pretend that's a double crochet. We've also got a double crochet at the end of the row. So what this does is it provides us as 1 normal stitch either side at the end of our row, so that we've got a nice straight edge on our crochet blanket or whatever you're making with this stitch. I'm now going to show you how to change colour before we move on to row 2. So to change colour, we're going to fasten off this colour. So make 1 chain and then cut your yarn, leaving a tail of about 6 inches. Then use your crochet hook to pull that tail through that final chain, give the tail a bit of a pull to tighten. We've now successfully fastened off. To add the new colour, first turn your piece of crochet over. When we work in rows, we usually turn our work over at the end of every row. Then pull up your next colour and we're going to put our hook into the top of this first stitch. So I'm going to be putting my hook in that space there, underneath both of the loops at the top of the stitch that form a kind of V shape here. And I'm going to lay my yarn tail over the top of my crochet hook, leaving a tail long enough to weave in later. About 6 inches is more than enough. Then use your hook to pull that loop through the stitch. Now before we start the next row, I like to do one extra step, which is a bit of a tip here if you're a newer crocheter. We're going to have to come back and weave this tail in. However, if we just leave it dangling here by itself now, this stitch can actually widen and lengthen as we crochet the rest of this stitch. It kind of comes loose. So we're going to add a little bit of friction here by taking that tail, laying it over the top of the crochet hook, and then I'm going to tuck it down here, just like that. And what that does is that catches the tail in the first chain and provides a little bit of friction, so that stitch is less likely to loosen until we can come back and secure the end in properly. I have a tutorial showing how to weave ends in that I will link in the description. To start row 2, make a chain of 3. 1, 2, 3. This counts as our first double crochet stitch, so that edge stitch to make the side straight. Next we're going to identify the chain 1 space of the cluster V stitch of the row below. So here you can see this is the back of our cluster V stitch. If I grab this cluster stitch and this cluster stitch here and pull, I've got a chain 1 space here. That's where we're going to be working into along this row. So into that chain 1 space, I'm going to make a cluster V stitch, exactly the same as we did in row 1. So I'm going to make 1 partial double crochet and a second partial double crochet, then yarn over, pull through 3 to create the cluster stitch, then chain 1, and we're going to make another cluster stitch back into the same chain 1 space. So 1 partial double crochet and another partial double crochet. So there is a cluster V stitch worked into the chain 1 space of the row below, and we're going to repeat this all the way along, skipping the stitches and working into the chain 1 spaces only, making those cluster V stitches in each chain across. So continue to work that all the way across, and I'll meet you once you're almost at the end of the row. So as you can see, I've worked those cluster V stitches into each space across, and I've got a couple of stitches left unworked at the end of the row, and we need to do our edge stitch here. So at the end of the row, we're going to work our edge stitch into the top of this turning chain from the row below that we counted as a double crochet. So I'm making my double crochet in that chain there, and I like to go under 2 loops here for security. So I'm going to make just a normal double crochet. Then we're ready to fasten this colour off and join our next colour. So for row 3 and all future rows are exactly the same as row 2. So we're going to repeat row 2 now until your piece of crochet is the size you want it to be. If you've enjoyed this tutorial, I'll pop a playlist of some more fun crochet stitches for you to try next, and I'll see you again next week for another video.